this one. For your project tree, what you're going to be doing is, am I still sharing my screen? Okay. What you're going to be doing is taking a look at making a web page called weather.html. It's going to look a bit like this, but there's going to be a few differences. You could use a different picture from the one shown above. You could just do like a general weather picture. You should already know how to put in an image based on project 2 that we just saw there. And then we're going to use different cities, continents can be the same, but use different cities than the one shown. So what you're going to say essentially is at the top of your web page, you're going to have three guys, continents that you would like. You could do like North America, South America, Europe, anything that you'd like to use. And when you have when you click on these links here, it's going to jump you down to these specific locations here. Okay. Now you're going to see this one little section is that when the user's mouse hovers over one of the links, the background color turns to silver. You can see here that that's kind of what's happening in the back end here. So I'll actually show an example of how to do this using CSS. We're not going to use JavaScript for this one. And then when the user is hovering over the South America link, let's see here, it should jump us down to these sections down here that have different links. So these ones are going to link us to like the sites of them. So let's go ahead and kind of get the boilerplate running together for this guy. Go ahead and open up our project. Okay. So this one's going to be called weather.html. I'm getting a bit lazy, so let me do it this way. There we go. It's my weather.html file. I'll go ahead and open them up. Oops. Open them up with VS Code. And what I'll do is I'll quickly go ahead. I'll keep my image the same. Let me go ahead and change this to like project tree starting. And what I'd like to do is kind of get us to be a place a bit similar to this one. Let's see here. Okay, so I have my project tree starting, and underneath it, I have this section of these three different links. So you'll see here that I have Africa, Australia, South America. What that will tell me is that I most likely need to create this thing of a navigation section or a nav menu, which will tell me what each of these guys are doing. And if I go ahead and I immediately try to use my nav menu, what will happen, let's see here. Keeps closing on me. Is that nothing appears just yet. So again, what happens inside of my nav menu? Well, this is where I'll create those A's in order to reference to use a href, right? So if I create my A's like normal, we'll see again that nothing pops up. Let's just say that I do North America for the time being. That's where we all are. If I go ahead and open up this guy, we'll see here that I now have my North America section. But again, this isn't really what I want. I want to go ahead and try to jump them down. So what I could do here using CSS is to make sure, let me go ahead and make a new header 2 down here. So essentially when I click on, small, when I click on this guy, it should jump me down to this section down here. And again, in your code down here, it should have a list of items. So one more thing is that you'll notice that all these are on top of each other. You could go ahead and kind of organize it as a list item or under the list item, but just make sure that you have them in a similar area. What I'll do here is cool. I'll link us to Charlestown or something like that as well inside of here. So when you go to this section right here, North America, what I could say is something like this. So if I want to go ahead and try to get a link to a section that I'm making, I could create another href like so, like this guy. Let's call it Charlestown. Now if I open up this guy, we'll see here that I now have a link to this new section here, okay? And again, as Felipe said, is that if I wanted to open it up in a new tab without overwriting it, I can simply do that target is blank, like so. Okay, now that opens it up there. How do I implement this guy to jump me down? Well, again, we're trying to use CSS to use this part, right? We want to make sure that it's jumped down. So what we could say here is I'm going to give my header 2 an ID, right? And I'll call this, to make it easier, I'll just call it North America as my ID name. Make sure that your names are kind of descriptive because that's easier to hold with them. And where does my href always go? It always goes inside of my A. And this is my nav menu for my website, so I could go ahead and just say href of North America. Issue right now, though, is that I'm trying to reference an ID, but I'm not remembering my pound sign. So always edit your pound sign if you're referencing an ID. You never want to add a pound sign when you're creating it, only when you're referencing it, okay? So now we'll see here that I have this nice looking North America thing, and I click on it, it jumps me down to here. Let's see, it does that, and then when I click on it, it opens that up for me, okay? Straightforward enough with these guys. Now, one thing is this concept of see here on this hover. So we had this issue where if I hovered over this guy, it should change a color. And this with CSS, we'll learn in JavaScript, there's events that go on. We can kind of call this events as well. But what you could say here is I'm going to use CSS to overload the background color right now. So right now what we're used to is we'll see here that all my A attributes are now covered with this background color. But in my actual code that's going on, what happens when I have my cursor hover over here, you might notice that my pointer becomes this kind of like finger. It's a single finger looking at it. That's actually an event called hover. And there's a ton of events that go on in CSS and JavaScript as well. And what you could do, and I'll show us this in specific for this question, but there's a bunch of different things that happen like this that's similar. If I put a colon, shift semicolon, this gives me the 2 dots of a colon. You'll see here that all of these are events that happen inside of your HTML. So active, this appears while an element is being activated by the user. Radio, this means that something is checked, so you can see if the user checks something. Current, decrement, defined. There's so much stuff here. I won't go through all of them, but the one that I'm going to get to here is called hover. What hover does is applies while the user designates an element with a pointing device, but does not necessarily activate it. So what this means is that if I literally hover over something, and what this code does now, it says, okay, when I have an A element that gets hovered over, apply this specific background color. And let's see if this changes anything for us. Looks like these are both not blue anymore. And when I hover over it, does everyone see I now have it as this element that's kind of blue? Okay. Now, is this only for A elements? How about I created a heading 1 that said project tree starting. I can now do an A1.hover, and I could say color Burleywood. And now, when I hover over my H tree, I now have a colored heading tree, okay? So that's how you would apply a background color in specific. And this is usually the way that you'll do it for anything. But actually, when you do any element with a colon after it, you'll have access to a ton of things that happen. And some of these, like, I won't even remember because there's so many out there, but there's a lot there. Visited is one you might see as well. That means that the user has already clicked the link. That tells us that we can change it. So what we could say here is if the A link has been visited, instead of it becoming purple, I'm going to change it to red, like so. So it used to be red. Now we can see here that I have a red link for those. Okay, cool. So those are some concepts to get us started with our project tree. And from there, you can kind of build it out. It's not too difficult from what we've already learned. But these guys are ways that we can apply different methods and like events. We call them events, but you'll see more about events later on for it.